What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Legs Will Move. I was going to bring a pretty unique video idea, or at least I think so, for you guys, and that is what is one of the best shoes that you could get for a boot camp style scenario. You can only really bring one shoe with you, so it's going to have to do everything for you, and there's a unique set of needs for things like boot camp. I was at OTCN, which is Officer Training Command Newport, that is with the Navy, in 2020. And I was able to see a lot of the things I wasn't really planning for up there. So I just wanted to share some of that with you. Now, if you're going into other branches of service or different bases, then these needs might be different, but I'm just giving kind of a framework of considerations for you. And I'm going to base all of my decisions around my experiences, specifically at Officer Training Command Newport, which is, of course, going to be different than other places. One of the things that you have to consider is that you're actually going to be standing around quite a lot. You also have to consider that you need traction on a variety of surfaces. You really need a shoe that's going to help you avoid injury, because if you get injured, you will roll back. What does that mean, to roll back? That means you will go to the class before you or that comes after you, and that means that you will miss at least 3 weeks for an injury if it causes you to miss a physical evolution or a physical evaluation during your time at OCS, at Officer Candidate School. The other things is that I've created a little bit of a diagram, or not a diagram, but a chart that has, the different qualities and how I'm ranking those. It's a scale from 1 to 10, but I put them in kind of categories of deal breaker, borderline, adequate, good, and ideal. Obviously, ideal being like 9s and 10s, deal breakers being like 1s and 2s in that category. I do have 7 measured categories that I think matter the most. Standing comfort, you will find yourself standing all the time, waiting for ceremonies, waiting to get issued some equipment for different holidays and recognitions and speeches. You will find yourself standing still at attention all the damn time. And so the standing comfort of the shoe genuinely is massive. It really is a huge thing. The other thing is the shoe needs to be able to run well both at slow pace, because you have lots of formation runs. It needs to be able to perform well at fast pace, because you do get evaluated on the speed of your runs during the PFAs. So we have 2 separate categories for that. Its ability to do a slow run, its ability to do a fast run. You have stability and injury avoidance. This is kind of just a composite score. What kind of stability features does it have? How wide is the base? How tall is the stack? All of those things kind of bundled together are going to get lumped into a single stability injury avoidance score. You're also going to have a traction on grass and turf because there's a track and field specifically at OTCN. And at this track and field, it is a turf field surrounded by a track, and then you do have some runs on asphalt. Sometimes you will ditch that asphalt and go into like actual grass. And then sometimes, to avoid inclement weather and maybe some other considerations, they sometimes will put you guys in this gym that has a really old finish on the floor, really old surface finish. So it's not the best grip. So having a good indoor grip, outdoor grip, asphalt grip, turf grip, all that stuff, a shoe with good solid grip is going to be important. And then finally, weight. The weight is going to be important for how the shoe performs in terms of running. But in addition to that, it's also going to be important for movements like leg raises and 6-inch holds. If you take a weight like this and you just hold it close to you, it's not going to feel terrifically heavy. But if you extend your arm all the way out and you start to hold that same weight, that weight is going to start feeling very heavy very fast. The same principle kind of applies to the leg raises. When you have your legs extended all the way out and you have heavy shoes at the end, you chose that max cushion, you chose a gel Nimbus or something like that, something that's pushing 11, 12 ounces of Brooks Ghost Max 2. It's going to make those movements a lot harder, and it is something that you will do frequently. I would say at least on a daily basis. Sometimes if you're really misbehaving, might even be on an hourly basis. So I think weight, due to how important it is for performance and due to how difficult it'll make some of those movements for you, weight is its own category for me. Now, you could decide for yourself how important these categories are for you. If if you're like, whatever, man, I'm so sure-footed, traction doesn't matter to me, cool. You can take that. I'm just going to give you my evaluations. If you're like, hey, I could run anything, I can make any shoe a fast run shoe with my talent, again, that's cool. I'm just sharing with you all of this stuff. So you decide for yourself how important these metrics are. In addition to that, I've not ran necessarily in all these shoes. I'm just using a conglomerate of data that's available on the internet from the different shoe tubers and stuff like that. And I'm able to kind of pull that together and give you like a consensus grade on how they perform in these different aspects. So I'm going to get started. So 1 to 10, and then it's got a total score out of 70 since each category's got 10 points. The first one I wanted to look at, it's something I thought a lot of you guys might consider, is the ASICS Superblast 2. For standing comfort, I gave it a 9 because of the stack height, soft foam, the relatively comfortable upper that a lot of people seem to enjoy. I also gave it an 8 out of 10 for the formation running. I also gave it an 8 out of 10 for performance running. It's got a very snappy foam. It's not plated, but it is very snappy. It's got a tall stack height to extend your stride. I think it'll do really well in that. For stability and injury avoidance, I gave it a 6 out of 10. It's quite a tall stack. It is a fairly wide net base, so that kind of helps it a little bit, but that tall stack height is going to hurt it in stability. Traction on grass and turf, it actually does have little nubs if you look at it. It's not just bald like some of the newer shoes from Adidas or Hoka. Their racing shoes right now have more of like a slick, bald rubber outsole, and that's fine for the road, but it's going to be really poor on things like turf and grass, especially with the moisture that happens up there. It's right on the coast, so there is a lot of humidity. There is a lot of moisture, and that's going to make the turf even slicker. And then finally, it's that rubber coverage is also going to do pretty well with the court and the tile, so I also gave it a 6 out of 10. Not amazing. It could have more rubber coverage, and I don't think they have quite the rubber reputation of like Continental or Puma Grip. So combination of those things, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. And then the weight is going to be 4 out of 10. And I know that a lot of people want to say that, hey, the ASICS Superblast is really lightweight for its stack. But in your mind, the weight is still going to be on your feet. Doesn't matter how much tech, it's still on your feet. And it's still going to make those movements harder, even if it is very lightweight for its stack. It doesn't really matter in this category. I'm considering the weight independent of other things. The next one I wanted to look at was the Puma Deviate Nitro 2. And I chose this one instead of the 3 for 3 main reasons. The 3 changed the outsole pattern to where it's less nub. The old pattern was more nubby. The 2 was lighter, and the 2 was softer. That's consensus from what I've heard from everybody. The nubs, of course, in this turf is going to be much more important. The lightweight makes it a little bit better for those movements, although it's not a very lightweight relative to this score, to this, this selection of shoes that I've picked for this video. Standing comfort, I gave it a 7 out of 10 with an asterisk because I know some people don't really like the fit of Puma shoes, so be sure that you're comfortable with the fit, but if you are, 7 out of 10. Formation running, 7 out of 10. Fast running and helping you get a good performance, 7 out of 10. Injury avoidance, 6 out of 10. I gave it traction on grass, turf, traction on court tile, 10s on both of those. And then finally, for weight, I gave it a 3 out of 10. It is still a little bit heavier. It's lighter than the 3, but it's still a little bit heavier compared to what's on this list. There's a shoe called the Hoka Cielo Road. I was looking through Running Warehouse, and I found this shoe, and it actually scored really high based on everything I could find. It's a non-plated 5K, 10K racer. At least that's what I understood. Kind of looking at it, kind of seeing the stack height and the setup, it kind of makes sense for that. But it checks a lot of boxes. Standing comfort, I gave it a 7 out of 10. It is PIBA. It is over 30 mils. It's like a 3 mil drop. I think it'll do really good in that. Formation running is the only thing I think it's not going to be amazing at, and it's still pretty good. It's adequate, 6 out of 10. Performance assistance, fast pace, 10 out of 10. Stability and injury avoidance, 10 out of 10. It's very low to the ground relative to a lot of the shoes. It has a pretty decent wide net base, and it's also fairly low drop, so you're kind of moving your heel closer to the ground, which is important. On traction on turf and tile, I gave them both a 9 out of 10. If you look at the traction pattern, it's got some difference in height from like the uppers and lowers, so it's kind of peaked. It will grip on turf pretty well, I do think. And then it's got lots of coverage, so that means it's also going to grip well inside. I'm really only docking it because Hoka's not really known for having the most amazing, grippiest compounds. The layout is good, but it's not going to be the best compound compared to some other brands in the industry. And weight, I gave it a 9 out of 10. Yes, it is a very lightweight shoe, but there are other lighter weight shoes on this list that are going to get 10s. So if they're 10s, then this has to be a 9. I did put a couple of carbon-plated racers on here just because I had a feeling that you guys would insist that you might consider those or that I should rate those. So one of the ones I picked due to the net base, and a lot of people said that the shoe is actually very comfortable at slower paces, which makes it unique. I don't think a carbon-plated racer that's going to be really uncomfortable at slow paces is going to be good. You will do a lot of formation runs. Keep in mind, though, that it's very rare that you would extend beyond 5 miles, maybe maximum 6 miles during OTCN. So even when we're talking about long runs, it's more like slow runs when I say the formation runs. But I'm just putting all this out there so you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about, because you're never going to run farther than 5 or 6 miles during OTCN. At least I didn't. Standing comfort, 10 out of 10. It's 40 mils of PBA. It's very soft. I've heard it's got a more forgiving upper fit than some other racers. 10 out of 10. For formation running, I gave it a 9 out of 10. You know, it is a racer, which I think is going to affect it a little bit, but I've heard it does slow paces really well. For performance help, I gave it a 10 out of 10. It's a lightweight carbon-plated racer with a lot of PBA. I think you'll be able to get a lot of help out of it. Stability and injury avoidance, it's a 5 out of 10. Yeah, despite it having a fairly good net base, it is still 40 mils of a very soft, squishy foam, and that's going to hurt it in that department. So far, that is our lowest injury avoidance and stability score. Traction on turf and grass, I gave it a 6 out of 10. It does have good rubber pattern. It is, different elevation in different spots, but it's not the deepest lugs, so that's going to hurt it a little bit. But it's going to score a little bit better on traction, on tile and court, so I gave it a 7 out of 10. Again, due to basically the same reasons why it doesn't score so great on the turf. And then the weight, I gave it a 9 out of 10. I also chose to include the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 3, again, because of the Puma grip. Also because I've heard it's not as squirrely, it's not as abundantly soft as some of the other racers out there. So that's going to make it just a little bit more stable. It's still not going to be great, I don't think. But anyways, standing comfort, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Keep in mind the fit, make sure it works for you. Formation running, a 6 out of 10. I haven't heard anybody say that the shoe is great at slow paces, so I think it's going to hurt there a little bit. But it is a carbon-plated racer, so it's getting a 10 out of 10 on performance help for speed. Stability, I gave it a 4 out of 10. I don't think it's got quite the net base that the Diadora does, and it's equally as tall. So, again, I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. Traction on grass, I gave it a 7 out of 10. You can see plenty of difference in heights and whatnot on that, so that's going to help it a little bit. So it is a good traction pattern, so it'll help a little bit with that. The traction on court and tile, I did give it a 10 out of 10. In all the key areas, especially the pads of the forefoot up into the toes, for things like burpees, getting in and out of the ground, mountain climbers, you've got a lot of rubber coverage in those key areas, and it is Puma grip, and it is, got a nice pattern to it. I think all those things combined, I think it's going to do really well on those courts and tiles. And then finally for weight, I gave it a 10 out of 10. The New Balance Rebel V4, it's going to do really well. It's a pretty balanced shoe. It's going to get a 9 out of 10 for standing comfort, a 7 out of 10 for formation running. It could be a little higher, maybe. I don't know. Haven't ran in it, but I have a feeling, it's going to be pretty decent. I know it's geared more for up-tempo training. So I did give it an 8 out of 10 for performance assistance, speed work, stability and injury avoidance. It's got a pretty good net base. Even though it is soft, it's a little bit wider. It is a trainer. And it's not quite as tall as some of the other shoes, so I gave it a 7 out of 10. Traction on turf and grass, I gave it a 6 out of 10. Traction on court and tile, I gave it a 7 out of 10. And the weight, I gave it a 9 out of 10. It's in the low 7s. Very similar shoe I found was also the New Balance SC Pacer. And if you look at them on paper, the Rebel V4 and the SC Pacer are like almost exactly the same shoe. Yes, I know that there are some differences, the plate difference, the compound difference. But in terms of stack, in terms of drop, in terms of traction pattern, in terms of net base, they are, in terms of weight, they are very similar to being they're very close to being the same shoe on paper in a lot of respects. So anyways, going down the list, standing comfort, gave it an 8 out of 10. Formation running, 7 out of 10. Speed work, I gave it a 10 out of 10. It is a carbon-plated racer for shorter distance, so I think it'll do really well for that. Stability, injury avoidance, I gave it a 7 out of 10. For traction on grass, I gave it a 6. Traction on court and tile, I gave it a 7. And the weight, I gave it a 9. So that one's going to score really well. Pegasus Plus, it's got a great traction pattern. The Pegasus line has always had nice lugs at the bottom, and that's really going to help. Good coverage. It's lighter than the regular Pegasus. I did not include the regular Pegasus on here, or maybe I did to prove a point. Yeah, it's just too heavy. It's really just too heavy. Anything over 9 ounces is really pushing it for this purpose. Anyways, I did include some things on here that have deal breakers just to kind of have a contrast. But anyways, I'm going to kind of speed up to make sure I get through all of these. Pegasus Plus, I gave it an 8 out of 10. Good stack of PIBA foam. It's going to have a more traditional upper. It's going to be fairly comfortable, I think. 8 out of 10 at least. Formation running, I give it a 7 out of 10. Performance running, 7 out of 10. It's not the lightest. It's not plated. It is PIBA, so it's going to be pretty helpful. 7 out of 10. Stability and injury avoidance, I gave it also a 7 out of 10. It's a very traditional running shoe. There's nothing weird about it. So it's going to do really well, and I think its traction is going to help its stability a good bit there too. I gave it 8s for turf and tile, for grass and for both indoor, outdoor, 8s in both. And then for weight, I gave it a 5. Here's our first deal breaker, and you got to decide if this is a deal breaker for you. I included the Topo Cyclone 2. And the Topo Cyclone 2, man, it scores high across the board except for traction on grass. I gave it a 9 out of 10 for standing comfort. It's a wide toe box. It's not going to pinch you. It's all that PIBA. 9 out of 10. Formation running, 9 out of 10. It's not plated, but it's super light, responsive foam. Performance help, 9 out of 10. I think it's the lightest shoe on this list. I could be wrong, but if it's not, it's very close. But it will go fast. It's got, it's when we're talking about being measured on the 1.5 mile distance, it doesn't need a ton of cushion because you're being timed on a 1.5 mile run. It's not a great distance. Stability and injury avoidance, I gave it a 10 because very wide net base with that wide front. It's fairly low to the ground compared to some of these others. It's a traditional-ish running shoe. It doesn't have anything weird going on with it, in terms of geometries and stuff. It's great. Here's where it kills it, though. Traction on grass and turf, I gave it a 2 out of 10. The only thing that could make it worse is if it wasn't rubber. It is rubber, but it's a bald application of rubber, which is really bad for grass and turf. Inside, that's great. I gave it an 8 out of 10. They're not known for their compounds. It could have, a little bit of a pattern that would maybe help it a little bit more, but it is a lot of coverage and it is rubber, so I give it an 8 out of 10. And the weight, it's in like the 6s. I gave it a 10 out of 10. Its big brother, the Cyclone, has the same problem. Just to give you a heads up, it's got a 2 out of 10 on the turf traction. That's in the deal breaker category, at least for me. Standing comfort, 10 out of 10. It's that same PIBA, same wide toe box. It's going to be super comfortable. 10 out of 10 for standing comfort. Formation running, 9 out of 10. Performance help, 9 out of 10. Speed work is what that means. Stability and injury avoidance, I gave it a 7 out of 10, which is pretty good. Again, it's very wide. It's kind of traditional, nothing weird going on. It's a little bit taller, so it loses some points there. Traction on tile, it's got the same problem as the Cyclone, so it's going to get an 8 out of 10 on tile and court. You already know that it got the deal-breaking score of 2 out of 10 for grass and turf. And then the weight, it's pretty decent. It's going to be an 8 out of 10. It's not horrible at all. Hoka Mach X2, the one with the PIBA on it. Standing comfort, I gave it a 9 out of 10. Running in slow or formation running, 7 out of 10. Performance help, 8. It's not the lightest shoe. It's not the best race shoe, but it is really good, so 8 out of 10. And the stability injury avoidance, I've heard it's a bit soft. It's got quite a big curve to it, quite a big rocker, so that can kind of reduce the amount of contact that you have with the ground. Gave it a 5 out of 10 for stability and injury avoidance. Traction on turf and grass, I gave it a 2 because, again, it's a fairly, smooth. There are no lugs. There's nothing to really let it bite into the grass at all. That does kind of help it a little bit with the That does kind of help it a bit with the indoor traction, which I gave it an 8 out of 10 because it is a good application of rubber. And in the weight, I gave it a 4 out of 10, which is pretty good, especially for its stack, but it's not the lightest shoe. I did include the Mach X or the regular Hoka Mach 6 because I had a feeling some people would ask about it. It's kind of got the same problem. There is some micro patterns in the Mach 6, so I gave it, a 3 out of 10. It's very, it's borderline, man. It is borderline on the traction on grass and turf. But everything else is going to score really well, and it's a nice, soft, supercritical EVA. So standing comfort's great. It's a traditional running shoe, nothing weird. 8 out of 10 standing comfort, 8 out of 10 formation running, 8 out of 10 performance. I mean, it's a fairly good, comfortable shoe across the board. All of you know this. It doesn't have any weird plates in it or anything. Stability and injury avoidance, 7 out of 10. It's not quite as tall as its peers. That helps it out a little bit, keeping it lower to the ground. It's not as extremely rockered, so you'll have a bit more contact with the ground at all times. I think it'll do decent in that area. The traction on tile and whatnot is going to be an 8 out of 10 just because it does have a good amount of rubber coverage. Compound could be better, could have a little bit more texture. That would help it out quite a lot, and the weight is going to get a 5 out of 10. It's not because it's a bad score, it's just because there's a lot of other lighter shoes on this list that are going to do better. Just because I saw so many of them when I was there, I wanted to include the Clifton. I do not recommend the Clifton. It actually fails in 2 departments. It's got a deal breaker in 2 categories, which is our first shoe to do so. Standing comfort, 9 out of 10. You know the Hoka. It's a traditional shoe with a lot of stack. It's fairly soft. So 9 out of 10. Formation running or slow running, 9 out of 10. It's going to do really well with that. Performance help, fast running, 4 out of 10. It's not very light. It doesn't have a plate. It doesn't have a propulsive foam. Outside of just being a good running shoe, it doesn't really have a lot helping you out to perform well in a timed event. Stability and injury performance is a 2 out of 10. It could be worse. It could be like super tall. A 1 out of 10 would be something like the Adidas Prime X, the 50 millimeter beast. That would get a 1 out of 10, but this is almost as bad in my opinion. It's very soft. It's tall. It doesn't have anything to kind of cage you over that midsole. It's pretty poor in that department. Traction on grass and turf, I also gave it a 3 out of 10, which is not great. It's a fairly bald traction pattern. It's not the biggest amount of rubber coverage. Traction on tile, it is fairly flat. There is some rubber, so I gave it a 5 out of 10. And then finally, on the weight, I gave it a 2 out of 10. It's just too heavy compared to all of these other shoes. You just have better options. Everything is relative. And yeah, it could be a great running shoe, but if you're trying to find a shoe that is the best for these applications, it's not going to score very well for this. Vaporfly 3, just because I thought people were going to ask me to include it. It has a really narrow heel. That is going to be the deal breaker here. Stability, injury avoidance is a 2 out of 10. It's just a little bit too soft and too tall at the same time and too narrow of a base. All those things kind of put together. I think this is an injury waiting to happen for the types of movements that you will have to do outside of running, because you have to do lots of like different body weight exercises, and I don't recommend doing those in this type of a shoe. Anyways, standing comfort, 7 out of 10. Formation running, it's a 7 out of 10. Performance help, speed running, of course, it's going to get a 10 out of 10. It's very lightweight. It is a racing shoe, so 10 out of 10. Traction on grass and turf, it is kind of nubbed. It's not the worst, so it's actually a 5 out of 10. I do think that the traction on court as well, it's lots of rubber coverage. It's pretty good. 7 out of 10. It's not bad. And then the weight's a 10 out of 10. This is a pretty good score across the board. It's just that the injury factor is so high, I wouldn't recommend it. The Pegasus 41, it's one of the most worn shoes in the world. I have a feeling people are going to be like, what about the Pegasus, the regular Pegasus? Here we go. Standing comfort, 8 out of 10. Formation running, 8 out of 10. Performance help and speed running, 5 out of 10. Stability, injury avoidance, 5 out of 10. I don't know why I put it that high. I would actually put it a little bit higher than that. Let's say maybe 7 out of 10. It is a little bit tall. It is a little bit soft. I don't know why I had it there, but yeah. Anyways, whatever, doesn't matter. Traction on grass, 10 out of 10. Lots of nubs. It's a good rubber pattern. Traction on court, 9 out of 10. It's lots of rubber coverage. It's good, and it's flat nubs. That's really going to help out a lot. Weight is a 1 out of 10. Compared to all the other shoes on this list, this is a very heavy shoe. I think it's like pushing 10 ounces, maybe even more, maybe even close to 11 ounces in a men's size 9. Just not great. Just not great. The Saucony Speed 4. It's another shoe I have a feeling lots of shoe enthusiasts are going to want to consider for this type of event, having all this versatility. Well, what about the Speed? It's one of the most versatile running shoes. Here we go. Let's look at it. Standing comfort, 8 out of 10. Formation running, slow runs, 8 out of 10. Performance help, fast runs, 8 out of 10. Stability, injury avoidance. I've heard this is one of the softer, more squirrely shoes lately. I've heard it's a step backwards in terms of stability compared to the 3. I gave it a 5 out of 10. Traction on grass, it's got a little bit of a pattern, a little bit of traction pattern, but it's not the most rubber coverage and it's not the deepest lugs. 5 out of 10. Traction on court and tile, 6 out of 10. And then weight, 5 out of 10. It's a pretty, standard across the board. I think for these purposes, I think you could find some better options. And then I chose to include a new player, which actually I think scored fairly well in my mind. That's the Tier Valkyrie Elite Carbon, another carbon-plated racing shoe. They do have a daily trainer version of this. It's not going to be a wildly different score. Basically, you're going to trade a little bit of, weight for maybe some slow run ability. But I think overall, I actually think the carbon shoe kind of fits a little bit better. Because it does have a wide net base and it's not as squirrely as something like a Vaporfly. So I think you could get away with this Valkyrie Elite Carbon. Anyways, let's score it. Standing comfort, 7 out of 10. Formation running, slow running, 7 out of 10. Performance help, 9 out of 10. It's not quite as light as some of the other carbon-plated racing shoes, but it is very good. It is a carbon-plated racer, 9 out of 10. Stability and injury avoidance, 6 out of 10, which is one of the better scores for the carbon-plated racers on this list. Traction on grass and turf, I gave it a 6 out of 10. It's got a lot of rubber coverage, actually, and it does have some different elevations of that rubber. It's just that it's not really lugged in anywhere, and it's, they're not really using any renowned compounds or anything, so it's fairly decent. Although the pattern kind of reminds me of some like light basketball shoes, and there is enough rubber coverage in the key spots to have good contact on court and tile. So I actually gave it a 9 out of 10 looking at it. And then the weight, it's not bad. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Even though it's a carbon-plated racer, just remember there's lots of lesser weighted shoes on this list. And that actually concludes all the shoes that I evaluated. I tried to give you some maybe expected picks, maybe some picks that you guys were probably going to ask about. What about the Pegasus? What about the Hoka? What's that classic Hoka? I forget the name of it. What about the Hoka Clifton? Like the go-to shoes. So I tried to cover a lot of those. I tried to include some oddballs. Actually, the highest total scores on this list is, I believe, the Topo Cyclone. Even though it had that deal breaker in terms of the traction, the Topo Cyclone scored really high on this. So if you can, if you're comfortable with the sacrifice and traction and you're like, hey, I'm really sure-footed, I can, deal with that on my own. It is really high scoring across the board otherwise. But actually, the total highest score, wasn't expecting this, and I just kind of found it browsing. But the more I looked at it, the P-backs, the net base, the rubber coverage, was the Hoka Cielo Road. It's low to the ground. It's got an explosive foam. It has a really low weight. It's got good rubber coverage. I think it's going to end up being one of the best shoes that you could take to an event like OTCN or any kind of officer candidate school. It scored a 60 out of 70. Really only loses points in slow running, and you may not even care about that. You say, hey, that's not evaluated. I don't care about that. And I totally get it. I hope this was maybe helpful to some people, and it was able to allow you to consider some of the things that you didn't think about when picking out a shoe to take with you and trust for the next 3 to 4 months at your officer candidate school, officer training school, boot camp, whatever it is that you may be doing. If you have any questions, put them down below. Be happy to help out, or at least give my thoughts on how I think it would perform, just based on the community data, the community knowledge that we have on these. Thanks again for stopping by, guys. This has been Legs Will Move. I'll catch y'all on the next one.